And we're back. You can't see it right now, but I am in a new studio, which means I don't have to deal with the noise from my neighbor anymore. For those of you who don't know, this is her.
And how many times will I cry out in vain? And how...
Anyway, I saw a very interesting movie the other day, so hold on to your butts. The Northman is a very well-made revenge story starring Alexander Skarsgård as Prince Amleth, a 10th century Norseman who flees his homeland as a young boy after witnessing the murder of his father the king, only to return years later as a hardened Viking berserker determined to avenge his family. Now you might go, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. Isn't that the story of Hamlet? Or if you didn't pay attention in school, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. Isn't that the story of the Lion King? And you're both right, and you're both wrong. You see, Shakespeare based the story of Hamlet on the legend of Amleth, written by the Danish historian Saxo Grammaticus. There's a lot of debate over whether or not Shakespeare committed plagiarism, but keep in mind there was no such thing as copyright in the 17th century. Personally, I feel that Shakespeare, copied someone else's homework. This movie is also based on a lot of Norse myths, Icelandic sagas, and Viking legends. It's the third movie directed by Robert Eggers, who also made The Witch and The Lighthouse, and he had the help of real historians and archaeologists in making this film as historically accurate as possible. One example of that is the score of the film, because they mostly used musical instruments from the Viking Age, like the tagelharpa and the langspiel, which, sound like IKEA furniture, but also like this. And it's that kind of attention to detail that makes this movie really immersive. The production design alone is exceptional. You really feel like you're walking into a lived-in Viking world. Most of the lighting felt like they only shot the movie using light coming from fires or sunlight. But even though it looks grounded, there is a fantasy element to it. There are witches and magical swords and such. But it feels very congealed with all the other elements of the film. The supernatural elements are treated with the same kind of care as the realistic parts, just like in the movie The Witch. So it seems like Robert Eggers keeps to some sort of code. A Norse code, if you will. Now the plot is very familiar. After all, we've seen hundreds and hundreds of productions of Hamlet. And at its core, it's a story about revenge and a family tragedy. The movie is pretty long, it's almost 2.5 hours, but somehow he keeps you engaged, like Kubrick did. It's very atmospheric storytelling. And it did surprise me along the way. One thing in particular I did not see coming at all. And one of the last shots of the movie is beautifully done, even though the setting of that scene reminded me a little bit of Revenge of the Sith. Also, Alexander Skarsgård is one of the most convincing Vikings I've ever seen on screen. And apparently he and Eggers wanted to make this movie for a very long time. And that shows. His character Amleth goes from a Viking berserker filled with hate and rage to discovering the cost of vengeance. The movie also stars Anya Taylor-Joy, Bjork, Nicole Kidman, who plays the Queen, Ethan Hawke, Willem Dafoe. I mean, this cast is stacked. Now you could call The Northman an action movie. There's violence and brutal fighting, but it wasn't shot like an action movie. They only used one camera. So they really had to plan out how to shoot each scene, and because of that, there are a lot of long takes. Normally, you would shoot something like this with multiple cameras, so you can sort of edit around any mistakes. That is not the case with this movie, so the fact that it's so well made and shot using only one camera is just amazing to me. Norse code. But I think this is one of those movies that'll get really high praise from filmmakers and people in the industry, but will probably get a fairly low audience score, because apparently when they screened the first cut of the movie for a test audience, people didn't understand it, thought it was too slow. And yes, it is slower paced, but the movie is building towards something. It doesn't have fast edits or over-the-top action scenes. You just need to take it all in. I'm not sure if the marketing for this film is doing a great job. For example, they changed the poster of the movie from this to this, and that tells me they want to sell this as some sort of Viking action movie. But for the people who didn't appreciate Egger's previous two movies, The Witch and The Lighthouse, maybe this film is not for you. Personally, I thought it was excellent. I highly recommend seeing it. Just make sure you pee before seeing it. I drank a lot of coffee right before the screening, and I almost burst a kidney. So yeah, don't do that. You see, I took the word Morse code and I changed the first letter from an M to an N, making it Norse code, implying that the Vikings used some sort of code. Obviously not Morse code because it didn't exist back then, but something different. Norse code. Get it? Norse code.